Hello, fellow music lovers, and thanks so much for coming by this channel. You know, I've been using this channel for years to upload bootleg content, which YouTube has taken down for copyright reasons over the years. Some of it's still up there, and I'm not planning on doing much of that. But I figured, you know what? I love music. I love talking about music. Why not turn on the camera and just start talking about music? So that's what's going to happen here. I'm going to be talking about some of the latest news going on, things that interest me about bands, songs, whatever. Maybe I'll have a friend or two join me. It'll be fun, and it's opinionated. I'm not trying to be neutral. I'm not trying to be fair. I'm very opinionated, and of course, a lot of things I say may not line up with yours, and that's fine. And you want to get upset about it and take it out on me in the comments, go right ahead. If you want to, you can actually get your own channel and do your own thing too. That's perfectly fine. That's what I'm doing. So anyway, in this video, I figured I'm going to talk about my top 5 favorite Rush albums. I figured that's a good place to start. I have a lot of ideas of things I could talk about. I have this one idea of just going album by album and just doing a video for every single album and talking about it. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas, but I'm going to start with this one, okay? My top 5 favorite Rush albums. Okay, album number 1, and I'm going to go in chronological order. 2112. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the album where Rush really started to come into their own. I know there's fans out there of Crest of Steel, but to me, they were still kind of, with their first 3 albums, they were just kind of finding their way. No pun intended. Or maybe it was, I don't know. But they really got it right on 2112. If you go back to Crest of Steel and you listen to something like The Necromancer or Fountain of Lamneth, you can kind of hear they had a lot of, they had their chops, they had a lot of potential, but it really wasn't until 2112 when they really learned how to focus it and how to make something that really was engaging. And the first side of 2112 is just amazing. I mean, there was nothing like it at that time. It's easy for us to now go, oh, it wasn't all that heavy because we've got Metallica, and we've got Slayer, and we've got all these other bands that are really heavy and fast and everything. But at the time, in 1975, there was nothing like 2112. I mean, even Black Sabbath wasn't laying the gauntlet down like this. I mean, this was pretty heavy stuff. And so, 2112, the opening 20-minute piece is just amazing. It takes you on a ride. And the lyrics, especially when you get into it and you realize how it was kind of reflective of what the band was up to. The band was up against the wall here. After Crest of Steel, the record label was like, what the hell are you guys doing? We want a Bad Company type band, and so what is it with this concept stuff? And so they were like, if you don't come up with something that we can put on the radio, you're done. We're going to wind up dropping you. So what does Rush do? They were like, all right. And they came back and they made another album that was a concept album, flew in the face of the record company. But this time they had it right, and they had an amazing opening track here. And it was this that began the grassroots movement. This is when Rush basically was able to do whatever they wanted, and the record labels just kind of left them alone. The fans gradually started, gravitating towards them, especially when they went to go see them live. They got their heads blown off, and so the reputation spread, word of mouth, because they weren't playing them on the radio. Nobody was playing 2112. So, Rush this was the jump start. If it wasn't for this album, we probably wouldn't have Rush. I mean, Neil was ready to go back working with his father. Geddy and Alex were going to go back to their day jobs. They would have rather done that than been a slave to a record label, which, is pretty much the norm now. So, you got 2112, an amazing album. You got Passage to Bangkok on there. You've got the song called Tears, which is a very, very beautiful song that Geddy wrote. And you've got Twilight Zone, love that song. And then you've also got Something for Nothing, which is one of my favorite Rush songs. Geddy's voice is so powerful, so clear and strong. So 2112, definitely my first favorite Rush album. This is not in any particular order in terms of what I like more. This is more of a chronological. All right, so album number 2 on my list of favorite Rush albums is Permanent Waves, okay? Just a few years after 2112, they decided they're going to take a complete change of direction. I mean, the difference between Hemispheres and Permanent Waves is startling. They went from, after 2112, they did Farewell to Kings, they did Hemispheres, and these are very proggy albums, songs 10 minutes in length, 20 plus minutes, very complicated, La Vila, the 9 minute plus instrumental, complicated. And when we got to Permanent Waves, though, they kind of wanted to streamline things. You could hear the change in their influences. It went from being Genesis and Yes and Crimson to becoming the Police and Talking Heads and Ultravox. Not that they sounded exactly like those bands, but you could hear the 80s influence kind of kicking in. They didn't want to go into the 80s sounding like a dinosaur band because, let's face it, prog rock was dead by 1980. I mean, there was nothing going on really that was of any count. It was really over. And so they needed to make a change. They became a lot more radio friendly. The Spirit of Radio, amazing song. Free Will, Jacob's Ladder, kind of a return. They were still kind of clinging on to their proggy stuff there. Entre Nous is a great song. And Natural Science, a 10-minute piece, kind of a step back into the proggy stuff. But the musicianship, it was so tight, much more tighter than anything that they had done before. I mean, you could really hear them gelling. And, Permanent Waves, to me, is one of their best albums. I only wish that it sounded a little bit better. I don't think that the production quality was quite there. It sounded a little bit flat. But nonetheless, an amazing album. Can't wait to get this in 5.1 at some point. They're going to do it. They're going to put it on a 5.1 Blu-ray and redo the sound. Maybe they'll remix it. I'm all for that. I would love to hear that album just really come to life. Now we're going to get to album number 3 of my favorite Rush albums, which comes right after this, Moving Pictures. To me, this is like one of my favorite all-time albums, and I would probably have to say that this is my favorite Rush album of all time. Moving Pictures kind of is another radio-friendly album, much like Permanent Waves, except more so. It didn't have as much of the proggy stuff on it. It's got Camera Eye. And that's pretty much it. The rest of it, is like Tom Sawyer, Limelight, Red Barchetta, YYZ. The instrumental, I mean, it's not as complex as La Vila, but it still has a lot going for it. It's a brilliant song. And you've also got Witch Hunt, which is just phenomenal. You listen to those lyrics and, it's more relevant now probably than it was before. You got Vital Signs, which is a cool tune, kind of pointing in the direction of where they'd be going next. To me, Moving Pictures is just a work of art. It's an amazingly solid album. Every single track on that album is stacked, as they say. I love that album all the way through. And then after this, I'd have to say that my number 4 favorite Rush album would have to be an album just a couple years later, and that is Grace Under Pressure. Now, the reason why I like this album so much probably is because it was the first Rush album I ever really heard. It was when I became a fan. I heard Distant Early Warning, and it kind of sold me. I had heard other stuff. I had heard New Old Man. I had heard Tom Sawyer, and I had heard Spirit of Radio. For some reason, maybe I was too young. They didn't really grab me. But when I heard Distant Early Warning, I was like, I just loved it. And then when I heard the album, to me, it was a very solid album. And Rush was kind of in a phase where they, and it kind of started with Moving Pictures, where there were 4 songs on each side, because we had vinyl back in those days. A lot of, the youth of today, they don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But when these albums came out, there were 4 songs on every side. That's the way it was on Moving Pictures and on Signals, Grace Under Pressure, and it was like that on Power Windows too. But every one of these, I mean, these were some solid albums. They were all very, very solid albums. I'm not saying that those other albums aren't any good, but Moving Pictures, I mean, Grace Under Pressure was just extremely solid. I loved every single track. I just loved the way that they were so tight. The musicianship was so tight. It kind of reminded me of the Police, like on steroids or something. You had Distant Early Warning, After Image, lyrically. I love that song. I mean, there's a lyric in that song that says, I feel the way you would, which if you've ever had someone that was close to you that you lost, and something happens maybe later, and you're like, I know that so and so would have felt the way that I do about this. That lyric to me was so powerful, and that song was very, very heartfelt. But yet it was very in your face. It was aggressive, and Red Sector A was about Geddy Lee's mother in a concentration camp. The Enemy Within, probably the most police-like song on that album. Body Electric is a cool song. It's got a tremendous breakdown in it towards the end, just amazingly tight. Kid Gloves, I love that song. Very short, sweet, to the point, and the guitar solo on Kid Gloves is amazing, and it just shows you how Alex was, changing his guitar style. His guitar style went from the moving pictures and before that very heavy riff kind of oriented to now, since Signals and Grace Under Pressure, his guitar was becoming more textural, and he sounded more like the Edge from U2, and it was really cool hearing him go through these different guitar styles and changing the way that he would present himself, and the way it worked in the albums. You've also got something like Between the Wheels, which was an amazing song lyrically. Like I said, it's one of those songs that's probably more powerful now lyrically than it was back in the day, which is probably one of the reasons why maybe they brought it back live. I think it was on the R30 tour. And then there's Red Lenses, which is a fun little song. One of the things that kind of struck me about that album was that, and one of the things that kind of struck me about Rush was that there were no background vocals. Like, there weren't any harmonies or anything. It was very much Geddy, and that was it. Now, that would change a little bit later. Geddy would do his own background vocals. But for this, we were still, and this actually was probably the last album for not having any kind of harmonies. That started to kind of creep in with Power Windows, and then we started getting into the albums after that, especially getting into the 90s. Geddy loved to do a lot of vocal stuff, like background vocals and harmonies with himself, and we hadn't gotten to that point yet. So we're going to get to the next and final Rush album. We're going to skip ahead to Counterparts. Now, Counterparts to me was a return to the heavier Rush sound, because when I first got into Rush in 1985, Rush was not really a heavy band. The last heavy album that they did at that point was Moving Pictures. Signals was a different beast. Signals, the guitars were textural. On Grace Under Pressure, the guitars were still kind of textural, a little bit edgier, but there were no riffs. And Power Windows, that was a texture album, no riffs. Hold Your Fire, no riffs, texture all the way. And then when we got to Presto, we got like Superconductor, which was like the first song since probably Limelight that we had a riff going on. And then Roll the Bones was more of a funkier kind of album. But when we got to Counterparts, the riffs were back, the crunch was back, the heavier, meatier, hairier guitar sound was back, and it just blew my mind when I heard Stick It Out. When that song came out as a single ahead of the album, I was like floored. I couldn't believe that Rush was this heavy. I mean, it was really heavy, and then Cut to the Chase is amazing. Double Agent, forget about it. What else is on that album? The opening track, Animate, is great. It's got Between Sun and Moon. It's got Alien Shore. Love that song. I wasn't really crazy about Speed of Love or Nobody's Hero. I'm not really crazy about that. Cold Fire is pretty cool. Everyday Glory is all right. But the album for me was the best. To me, Counterparts is the best Rush album to come out post Moving Pictures. The songs were short for the most part. They were very, very short songs, and they were right to the point, heavy, melodic, and a reconnection to what I believe is the guts of Rush. And so That's it. Those are my 5 favorite Rush albums: 2112, Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures, Grace Under Pressure, and Counterparts. Now, they've had a lot of other great albums, and one day I'll talk about them in more depth. I want to hear what your 5 favorite are. Put them down in the comments below. Let's talk about it, and I'll be back soon with another video about something else entirely. All right? So thanks so much for coming to this channel, and I hope to see you again.